you're in a really tough situation when you're trying to go out there and protect and serve, because a lot of the battles that you're actually fighting aren't really the battles that you think you're fighting.
You can't just request and demand someone's ID. That's illegal. You have to have what's called reasonable suspicion.
But you imagine, like, I'm a 17-year-old kid, and my coping mechanisms were just hypervigilance, like always head on a swivel, right?
Mm,
And then I have to go into the corporate world,
yeah.
and I have to learn how to be an adult in a completely different environment, but I have to use the skills that I learned on the streets.
Have you ever thought about why it's important to focus on your mindset and to deal with certain traumas? Well, we're going to talk about how trauma, anxiety, and all those things play a role in your decision making and how it plays a role with our interactions with each other. Let's get into it. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you and welcome back to The Human Side with yours truly, Officer Jill. I am a police officer in Los Angeles. You know that I am committed to improving the relationship between law enforcement and the community. And one of the ways that I think that we can do that is by having impactful conversations. When we have these conversations, we create a space to have deeper understanding. And when we have that deeper understanding, it produces empathy. And when we have that empathy, that can create an actual relationship. And that relationship can flourish to actually having a good partnership, which makes both the community and the police departments thrive together. So today we are going to have a great conversation with a man by the name of Roshun Jones. Just a little bit about Roshun. Roshun is a transformational mindset coach and a certified master trainer who's changing lives by helping people unlock their potential and step into their God-given purpose. Roshun's journey is nothing short of inspiring, from battling his own crippling anxiety and depression to becoming a bold and confident leader. He now uses his own transformation to guide others. He is a master NLP practitioner. What is that? We are going to find out. And he is also a master hypnotherapist. Yes, a hypnotherapist and a mindset trainer. He has helped countless entrepreneurs and individuals overcome emotional barriers and align their mindset with their purpose. So today we're going to be diving into trauma, to mindset, and all these different things, and how we can relate that to improving the relationship between law enforcement and the community, and just your overall self. So can we please welcome Mr. Roshun Jones, y'all?
Hey,
Roshun, how are you?
I'm good. I'm sweating. I don't know if it's because I'm
Sweating.
on a show with you or what's it like.
No need to be nervous. Listen, the police were this is a very
I
safe
know. I was like, do I
place.
need should I have my attorney here with me present? Like,
No attorneys needed today. You're good, I promise. Unless, no, we're not going to go there. We're not going to go there. I am really looking forward to this conversation. I am really interested in all the things that you do. A master hypnotherapist. That is awesome. That is really awesome. But before we go into that, I like to get an idea of where my guests, where their perspective is as far as law enforcement. Before we go into some of the amazing things that you do, go ahead and introduce yourself, Roshan.
yeah, definitely. I appreciate that, Joe. I just want to put my hands up. I don't know. I don't
You're
know what to
right.
do here.
You're good. That's
No,
funny
this is
though.
awesome. Yeah, so thank you for that introduction. My name is Roshun Jones, as Jill said, and I am a transformational coach. I work primarily with Christian entrepreneurs, but in my past, I've worked with entrepreneurs. I've worked with people that want to become entrepreneurs, people all across the board. And so I believe that a lot of the things that people struggle with is as a result of their internal programming. And so I help people identify what patterns are playing out at an unconscious level, and we'll talk about that a little bit here shortly. But I help them uncover the patterns that are keeping them from getting the results that they want in their life. So, with respect to where I see things are with law enforcement right now, it's tough. You guys have a really tough job, considering the state of affairs that our country's in, and this can extend even past our country. This, like, other countries are experiencing the same issues. And so when I really thought about it, so like policing is kind of a system inside of a system, meaning that you're meant to protect and to serve, and you're protecting and serving people inside of a system where they aside from the actual policing, they're already feeling like they're disenfranchised. They feel like they're being shortchanged. They feel like there's not a whole lot of transparency from the government, and so that's crazy. That's creating a lot of beliefs and emotions around that in and of itself, and then that gets projected onto police officers when you come in contact with them. So I believe that you're in a really tough situation when you're trying to go out there and protect and serve, because a lot of the battles that you're actually fighting aren't really the battles that you think you're fighting, and we can get into that a little bit here
Mhm.
shortly. But
Yes.
just overall, I just think it's a really tough situation that you guys are in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. We appreciate that. We appreciate you being able to see the challenges that we're dealing with. Let me ask you this just and I always ask every guest these first two questions. One is going to be what's your perspective on the current relationship between law enforcement and the community?
Okay,
What would you
my
say is your current perspective?
my personal perspective is like me personally, having grown up with a certain beliefs about policing, and police officers. I would say now as an adult, I do have a healthy respect for police officers. I would say that the relations that you have with the people is that there's a loss. There's a loss of respect that the general public. I wouldn't say the general public. There's a certain sect of the population that has lost respect for police officers. And I don't think
Mhm,
it's anything to do with like the individual officers themselves. Like I said, it's more of a systemic issue,
mhm.
as far as trust and core beliefs that they have around police officers.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Let me ask you this. How have your personal experiences shaped your understanding of law enforcement?
I grew up in an inner city. I grew up just outside of Los Angeles, and
Mhm.
so the the community and policing relationship wasn't the best. Like I don't think it's ever really been the best. Inner city
Right.
to police officers.
Right.
And so I remember as I was reflecting on this, like I had encounters as a teenager, which now that I think back on as a kid, they weren't the most positive interactions.
Mhm.
And so I can count on maybe one hand, how many interactions I've had with police officers, and
Mhm.
majority of them have been positive. But there have been a couple of where they weren't so positive. So I've been able to work through the beliefs that I've had about police officers, through my work. But
Mhm.
I could see how if I hadn't done the personal work myself, I would have still probably maintained some negative beliefs about police officers.
Right. Right. And that's great because that's a great way for us to segue into learning more about what you do. You
Yeah.
are an NLP practitioner, which stands for I'm gonna attempt this, okay? Stands for a neuro linguistic programming practitioner. Did I get that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yes.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Say that 3 times, huh?
Yeah. I even struggle with it. Like I usually say like linguistics. For some reason I want to put s on the end of it, but it's linguistic programming. Yeah, you did great.
Awesome. Well, tell us what that is exactly.
So neuro linguistic programming is essentially just it's a model. Just like think about when you watch the weather, and they say
Okay.
there's a 50% chance of rain or a 60% chance of rain. They're looking at a whole bunch of data, and they create a model, and they say based off of this model of the data, there's going to be this percentage or this probability of rain. And so where NLP came from is a group of guys that got together and they studied people that were successful. And what they did was they monitored them and they looked and seen their behaviors, their habits, their thoughts, and then they wanted to find out what were they doing that was causing them to be successful.
Mhm,
And then based off of that, they created a model. And then basically they said, if you do these things, then you can be successful too. Which is why even now you'll hear people say, in order to be successful, you have to have successful habits
mhm.
and you have to do the boring things. You have to do the things that like people don't want to do, which is why a lot of people aren't successful, is
Right.
because they don't want to do the boring things that gets them the success. And so NLP is just a way of being able to take someone who has done something successful or done something that you want to do and model them. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. I like that. So when you say that, you know what the first thing first thing that comes to mind to me, I don't know, I have a police brain, I guess. Um and I'm trying to simplify it, right? What you said,
yeah,
you did
yeah.
a great job of explaining it, but I guess for me, in order for me to understand something, I try to apply it to my own world, right?
Okay.
And so immediately I think about as it relates to policing,
Yep.
when I was a probationer, a rookie officer,
Yep.
and the reality is when you do 6 months in the academy and you learn a bunch of good stuff. However, it is nothing like actually being out on the street.
Yep.
And so when you actually get to come going out on the street and you're with your training officer,
Yep.
we're essentially doing everything they do. Like
Exactly.
literally, it's like
Exactly.
you're you are a total robot.
Yep.
And whatever they say, you say. And I remember I was working I work in LA, in Los Angeles, and then this particular area that we worked in, it was a high gang area, and my training officer actually was a previous gang officer. And you come out of the academy and you're real structured and you're sirring and mamming, and I remember he addressed these gang members in such a chill and calm way, like they were his homeboys. And
Yeah.
I'm like, and so I just went right into that too. And I was like, yo, what's up, man? Right. And it worked. It totally worked, right? And so
Absolutely.
I don't know, I just kind of put that. Sorry, I just had to kind of connect that for myself for anyone else who's watching.
No,
So that's
yeah,
pretty much what it is, right?
that's a perfect example of it. You're
Okay.
modeling your training officer
Yeah.
because you assume that they're successful, and so you just model after what they're doing. One thing I want to point out to you, so as part of the model, there's what's called rapport building.
Mhm.
And so what you were essentially modeling was how to build rapport with people. So like you said,
Mhm.
you come out of the
Right.
academy and you're like beep boop, 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 right? Like this is the way that the
Yes.
book taught me. And
Yes.
then people don't talk like that out in the real world. And so
No.
in order to build rapport with them, you match them, you mirror them.
Mhm.
So if someone is talking, like with slang, then you talk to them in slang, but you do it in
Right.
a way that's you still asserting your authority. You're not going, hey, we're not like friends, but you're bringing it to a point where you can build rapport with them, so they don't feel like there's such a distance between you and them.
Let me ask you this. So, is it safe to assume that if you are modeling good behavior, the same can be true for modeling bad behavior?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So think about it. So we get a lot of our core beliefs and values before the ages of 7.
Okay.
And so the biggest influences of people that kids model are going to be their parents,
Mhm.
their siblings, and the kids at school, their
Right.
teachers. Like those are the
Right.
biggest influences that kids have.
Right.
And so, for instance, if the parents are doing things that aren't aren't good, then the kids are just going to model it. If the
Absolutely.
older brother is doing something that's not good, the younger brother is just going to model it. So it's a
Yes.
huge, 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 huge distinction that you picked up on there. Is that yeah, like we model good and we model bad.
And I think that shows up in policing also. We have to
Mhm.
be honest.
Yeah,
There are definitely times where have been right. History has shown us that there have been those moments and incidents where officers have not done right, right, and they've
yeah,
abused their authority, and to be honest, I can't say that I necessarily I've seen those incidents where people are getting beat up and things like that. I just haven't seen it in my career, right?
yeah.
And I think body cameras has changed that dynamic a lot. However, I do see um and I'll just be honest, I do see maybe bad teaching if
Mhm.
that makes sense, right? Like how I described how I model my training officer who's thankfully for me, I had great teachers who
Yeah,
taught me how to become a great police officer and just a great person, right?
yeah,
And really being committed to what I agreed to do and serve in the community. But
right.
there are times where you see You see people teaching like, "Yo, that's probably not a good thing to teach that kid."
Yeah. Yeah. Love it or hate it. So for whatever reason, I get into these feeds on like YouTube,
Mhm.
and there's these what do they call them? Constitutional advocates, or
Yeah, yeah, the
you know what I'm talking about?
the audit
Auditors.
people, constitution
Yeah.
auditors,
Yeah.
yeah. They're interesting, just so you know, quite
Yeah.
interesting.
They're what?
They're quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely have some questions about that later. So,
Alright, that's cool.
um, and so I think the purpose that they serve in one respect is educating the public. I think that's
Yeah,
their objective is to educate the public.
yeah,
And I would say that there's a positive takeaway from it, in that, so I think there's this belief, like, in society, that that police officers are corrupt,
yeah,
and they're out there to assert their own agenda.
right.
And so you see it when someone gets contacted by a police officer, and things aren't going the way that the person wants. And so they immediately say, "Hey, will you call a supervisor?"
Right.
And then they want the supervisor to come out and basically school the person who, in their mind, is not aware of the law, aware of the Constitution, so on and so forth.
Right.
And so there's a little silver lining for people when the sergeant comes out, or the supervisor comes out and says, "Yeah, like, maybe we need to do some more retraining on whatever the case may be," right?
Mhm.
Because, and it doesn't even really have to be like someone that has authority, but just someone that comes out and just brings a little bit more balance and logic to the conversation.
Mm,
Because I appreciate, like, in those settings, it's just a really high emotional situation. So what I found is that, yeah, in those videos, it brings some balance between the police officers and the community, in
okay.
that, people are looking for an advocate. I think that's really what it is. Like, people are, like, the community is just looking for an
Yeah.
advocate, so that they feel as though it's not just a one-sided relationship.
Okay. So and it's good. I'm glad you brought that up. So I believe, and I don't know if you believe the same way, but I believe that in order for the relationship to get better, and actually get to that point of thriving and actually working together in partnership that I explained,
Mhm.
there is an onus on us as the police, of course, obviously, but there's also some responsibility in the community, right?
Yeah.
Which kind of brings me to, how, in your opinion, how can the community model better behavior,
Mhm.
right? In your opinion, what do you think?
And so in my opinion, so I'm obviously I'm a Christian, and I
Mhm.
have some strong, Christian values. And so if I extend that, and I say, if everyone adopted good values, like, if we actually lived by love thy neighbor,
Yeah,
there would be no need for policing.
yeah,
It would just completely go away. And so earlier when I started, when I talked about how you guys have a tough job because, like, you're like a system within a system,
mhm,
we have to get out of the one-on-one interactions that you're having with, like, people that's out on the streets, and ask the question of why is that person in the mental state that they are that they're in?
mm,
Why do
mhm,
they have the belief systems that they do? Why are they
mhm,
out there stealing? Why are they out there robbing people? Why are they out there, creating assaults? Why do they just not care?
right,
And so you're trying to police a problem that you can't really, like, fix. You're
mm,
just fixing you're dealing with the symptom,
right,
but not the root problem.
right,
And so there is some responsibility that the community has in saying, how do I resolve my generational trauma? Like,
mhm,
how do I get rid of the anger? How do I get rid of the negative emotions that are causing me to go out there and behave the way that I am? Like,
right,
when am I going to resolve around the relationships that I have with my father? Like, how am I going to resolve around the relationships I have with my mom? You know, when the community can get behind that agenda and saying that I'm no longer a victim.
Mhm.
I'm no longer going to allow the system to tell me that I'm a victim.
Right.
That's when your job starts to get easier.
Right.
But
Right.
until the community takes responsibility for that, you're just continually just chasing the same problem over and over.
I like that. Yeah, I think obviously our traumas, the anxiety that we have, and our emotions, everything it feeds into our behavior.
Mhm.
I teach a class at work, and one of the things that we focus on is intervention, right? Which is intervening and stopping officers from making bad decisions, whether it's on purpose or just making a mistake. But also, it involves wellness,
Mhm.
and it involves being able to identify what triggers are causing you to make certain decisions. And
Yeah,
so I know that you have one of the reasons why you're doing what you're doing is because you have battled your own struggles with
right.
anxiety, and it's affected you. It affected your life. Can you please tell us more about that?
Yeah. So as a kid, as I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking about it. Like, as a kid, I dealt with an underlying. I always dealt with an underlying level of anxiety.
Hmm.
And while I'm not a police officer, and I don't live under the same stress that you do on a day to day basis.
Yeah.
Growing up in the inner city, I realized how hyper vigilant it made me. Like, even
Yeah.
as an adult, so as a kid, like, it was always head on a swivel every single day. And that creates, I guess, to a certain extent, PTSD.
Yeah.
And I remember when I moved to Washington, where we were living is kind of out in the woods. And I remember about a month or so after being here, I was laying there one night in bed. It was pitch dark, quiet, and I couldn't hear the police sirens. And I freaked out.
Wow.
Like, it was
Wow.
like it was so crazy to me because I was so used. So we
Yeah.
we lived we lived down the street from the hospital.
Yeah.
So every day the ambulance would go by and I would hear the
Someone's
sirens like all the time. And the moment that I didn't hear it, it was a trip. I completely like tripped out on it.
wow.
Yeah. It just yeah. So I lost track of
Wow.
what I was saying. What was your question?
So you were talking so look that you know what the I mean we're laughing, but the trippy thing is just going back to that moment, right? The anxiety kind of took your
Yeah.
mind there a little bit, right?
Yeah, I know. I was like, where did I go?
Right.
Like, yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because, like you said, like, I was able to. So what I did was, like, it was somewhat of a regression that I just had, in that I took myself subconsciously. I took myself back to that point of laying in bed and like having that anxiety of not having to be so hyper vigilant at that moment. Like, I was like,
Mm,
the PTSD had kicked in, and that I was like, I
wow.
didn't know what to do, not having that the things around me to be hyper vigilant about.
Yeah.
And so from that point forward, like, into my adulthood, so you imagine, like, I'm a 17-year-old kid, and
Mhm.
my coping mechanisms were just hypervigilance, like, always head on a swivel, right?
Mm,
And then I have to go into the corporate world,
yeah.
and I have to learn how to be an adult in a completely different environment, but I have to use the skills that I learned on the streets.
Right.
And so it was
Wow.
this constant, like, having to learn to fit in, learn how to not be so hyper vigilant, and I think that in itself caused more anxiety.
Mm,
And so it got to a certain point where, as I was leveling up in my career, that I realized that the skills that I had as a kid, they were no longer serving me.
mm,
And so after having, like, series of panic attacks over and over, that's when I finally, having gone to, doctors and psychologists and going to the ER like all the time, I realized that, I had to find something else, had to find an alternative. And so that's what led me to NLP. And it was something that helped me understand why I was being anxious, and at an unconscious level, like what were the thoughts and the behaviors that were playing out that were causing me to be anxious, and why I was responding in my behaviors the way that I was.
Wow. Wow, that's crazy. I love that though. And as you share your story, some listeners know, but I have been open about I myself I have had a panic attack. And so I know exactly what that feels like. And I will tell you it by far it was the scariest moment of my life, right? Now, mind you, this is the same person who has chased someone down an alley in the middle of the night in Los Angeles who potentially has a gun,
Yeah,
right? And it is the scariest moment of my life. So I can't even imagine, having to consistently go through that,
yeah,
you know, and
yeah,
being in that state, and how it affects a person. And so I'm glad to see that you were able to come out of that,
yeah,
and to use that to help others
yeah,
navigate that
yeah, definitely.
space.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. This is a testimony that if there is someone out there that's listening to this,
Mhm.
and they're probably thinking that I'm never gonna get out of this. Like I'm always gonna wake up. I'm gonna wake up every day with constant thoughts of whatever, that you're going to die, that you're going to have to go experience another panic attack, that you're going to
Mhm.
be depressed forever, that whatever the racing thoughts are. This is your permission to believe that there's going to be a day where you look back and go, man, I remember when I used to.
Right.
Like, you can be released of that now.
I love that. I love that. Absolutely. And I also I think about that, and I think about officers, and I think about all the trauma, the untreated trauma that
Yeah,
we are exposed to.
yeah,
And I tell people all the time, it's one of the reasons why I do what I do now is that untreated trauma coupled with chronic stress,
yep,
it affects the decisions that we make.
yep,
And the decisions that we make, particularly on the job, it affects everything. Ultimately, it affects lives, it affects our
yeah,
reputation, it affects people's careers, right? People get fired because of bad decisions that they
yeah.
make that are influenced by untreated trauma and chronic stress. And so let me ask you this. I kind of just went over it, but in your opinion, how does trauma affect the community? Or do you think that the untreated trauma has affected the community's involvement with as far as the relationship between law enforcement?
Yeah. So you mean from the perspective of,
From a perspective from you as a member of the community, right? Obviously,
yeah,
you're not in law enforcement. So if you
mhm,
had, if or and if you even think so, do you think? I guess that's probably the better question to ask you is, do you think that untreated trauma affects the relationship between law enforcement and the community? And before you answer, I say that because I've asked multiple guests, and obviously, as you can see, or if you're listening and you can't see, I'm black.
you are?
Yes, surprisingly, I'm black, and obviously, I have constant and consistent conversations with friends and family members regarding the tattered relationship between the black community and law enforcement. And unless you've
Mhm.
been literally hiding under a rock for the past 200 years, you would know that that exists. Um, but I tend to believe, I don't think this is the case for every situation, but I tend to believe that some of the bad perspectives that the black community has towards law enforcement, some of that comes from passed down trauma and not a specific interaction, right? Like there are people who
Yeah,
have never come in contact with the police, but they
yeah,
have a bad perspective. Someone say, well, on the news, yeah, but you haven't experienced it for yourself.
yeah.
So I guess, I mean, I don't know. Do you think that is something? Am I reaching? Am I making excuses for police? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to side with you on this one, and probably say the unpopular thing that I think a lot of the narrative around the Black community and policing is, um, how do I want to say this? So yeah, it's there's a lot of lies that are told to people in general, black, white, purple, green, doesn't matter, right? There's a narrative that gets pushed onto the people to create division.
Mm, mhm.
And as you said, there are people that have beliefs about police officers who have never come into contact with a police officer.
Yeah.
And so if but they have that belief. So where did the belief come from?
Right.
So it came from someone else. They got it from someone else. Now, in no way does this mean that, someone's, brother, mother, son, father who came into altercation with police officer who was unfortunately killed.
Mhm.
I'm not disregarding that because I know that
Right.
there's emotions that are associated with that. The society that we live in today, it gives people license to not take personal responsibility for their actions.
Mm,
And that's across the board. That's even aside from the relationships that the community has with policing. It has everything to do with just people existing in our society. And so
okay.
when we've made it okay for people to not take personal responsibility for their actions, that then is what causes the relationships that we have, not just with
Mm,
policing, but with our spouses, with our
mhm,
kids, with our neighbors, with everyone.
mhm.
And so again, we have to float up a little higher and ask ourselves why? Like why is there so much
Right.
division?
Right.
Let's start there, right?
Right.
Because like you said, and I love the whole premise of your show, it's about showing the human side of policing.
Yep.
At the end of the day, Jill, like you're a person. Apparently you're a black person
A
too.
bl
Like we're learning this today, right?
Yes.
Right?
A
And
Black
so
proud American.
yes, I mean, and so you've dealt with anxiety, you've dealt with emotions, you've dealt with like all the things that a white person has, that a Mexican person has, that a Native
Mhm.
American person has, that an Irish person has, like all the people, right? There is no, we're just all the same. Like here in Washington, like there's probably disproportionately more Caucasian police officers than there are
Yeah.
African American
Yeah.
officers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I haven't had negative influence or negative encounters with any of them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now,
Right.
I feel more fearful walking down the street and being assaulted by my neighbor than
Mhm.
I do having a police officer come over and
Yeah.
assault me.
Yeah.
And so I've had, and I was thinking about this earlier, as a kid, I was a teenager. I remember I was riding. I had a police officer. He pulled up on me and he searched me. Because I was where I lived. There was high crime, high drug
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
So he just stopped me and searched me and sent me on my way. Now nowadays, like that just wouldn't fly. But right? But like I can choose to go, yeah, man, I remember he stopped me, illegally searched me and violated my constitutional
Yeah.
rights and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I can choose to do that. Or I can choose to be like, I don't know that dude, man. He's just trying to do his job, trying to take care of his family. And he's under the target every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I don't just love it because you agree, honestly. I love it
Okay,
because
now I'll disagree.
right. No, I love that because you're being honest, and I know and not everyone has that experience that you have, right? Not every and let's be honest, not every black man feels that comfortable, right? And not that afraid.
Yeah.
I'm not let me acknowledge that I do believe that there are definitely some very specific and unique struggles. that present themselves in our country to Black men.
Yep.
And I have 8 brothers and millions of, I won't say millions, but hundreds of cousins, of male cousins who have expressed and shared some of their experiences, both years ago and current. So, but yeah, I think it's something that we should be willing to talk about, particularly in the Black community. Is it the answer for every encounter? No, it's not. You know, are there legitimately officers who, whether whatever color they are, that are abusing their power? Absolutely. As of recent, what was the last one with, was the officer? I forgot her name. The lady with the boiling water. Massey, Sandra
Oh,
Massey,
right, right, right.
and the
Yeah,
officer shot her, and she should absolutely 1,000,000% be alive today. one million
yeah,
percent. That was just one, as we see, just someone who should not have been hired as a police officer,
yeah,
and two, just poor training, period. That was
yeah,
just poor training. So, but yeah, I think it's always good to have that, to at least have that conversation. And not everyone
yeah,
is willing to talk about it. So I appreciate it. I
yeah.
appreciate you being willing to talk about it. Let's talk about anxiety. Right. So in previous presentations, you've stated that anxiety often comes from fear of the future. I love
Yeah,
that, by the way, right?
yeah.
Which I've never, I mean, ultimately, that's what it is, right? Anxiety often comes from fear of the future. How does an officer attempt to manage that anxiety when one of our consistent practices is to anticipate danger? You
Mhm,
know what I mean? All around us, right?
mhm.
Which can easily create that anxiety. It's like, we're, as officers, I know we may not admit it, or officers may not admit it, but it's almost like we're constantly in a state of anxiety,
Yeah.
right? What do you think? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so there's a couple things I wanna mention about. So this is the way my brain works.
Okay.
So there's depression and anxiety, and a lot of times they go hand in hand.
Okay.
Someone can be depressed and kind of exhibit like anxiety like symptoms, I believe.
Mhm.
Uh, so so depression is focusing on the past. So if there's someone that's dealing with depression, it's because they have reoccurring thoughts about something that happened in the past.
Okay.
If someone has anxiety, they're having reoccurring thoughts about something that may happen in the future. And when I say may happen is inside of our brains, we create this movie and they're just playing a movie of what's considered a undesirable outcome,
Hmm.
right? No
Okay.
one no one has like if you're gonna go have ice cream like after this podcast and you're excited about it, you're not anxious about it, right? But you're playing that thought, man, I'm gonna get 2 scoops. I'm gonna
Mhm.
I'm gonna get it in the cup because I'm trying to watch these calories and
Getting
right.
ice cream.
And exactly. But you know how we are, right?
Right.
Can I get a Big Mac with a Diet Coke, like
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
so
Squirrel moment.
so so anxiety is just playing this movie of an undesirable outcome.
Okay.
And the brain doesn't know the difference between what's imagined and what's real.
Mm.
And so a really cool technique for anxiety is you can play the movie out till 15 minutes after a successful outcome.
Okay, say
So
that
if you're
again. Say that again.
so you play the movie
Mhm.
and you play it out to 15 minutes after a desirable outcome.
Okay.
So because again, you're the director and producer of the movie in your mind.
Mm.
So you can either have it be an undesirable outcome or you can have it be a desirable outcome. But the key is that it never happened yet.
Right.
The thing that you're anxious about has not
Right.
happened,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so now you're saying, well, look, you don't have people like hunting you down, like like officers potentially do,
Right.
and so it's about perception.
Mm.
Earlier I was saying like I grew up in the inner city, and while I was hyper vigilant, I very quickly learned to assess people.
Mm.
And I think it's just something that you do when you grow up in the city.
Yeah.
You just learn to like look at people, assess them, and go friend or foe. That's honestly
Yeah.
like how I looked at people. And I
Mhm.
even still to this day I do it. It's just ingrained in me.
Right.
And so I'm pretty sure that when you come into contact with people with the community, you're doing the same thing unconsciously,
Absolutely.
right? And
Yeah.
so with someone who is friend, you're like, okay, this goes into this category, but I'm still keeping an eye on you because you never know like if things are going to turn on you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
so
Yes.
so it's about managing the perception that you have of the situation. I always
Okay.
tell people, and it's kind of like it's kind of out there in that reality doesn't exist. People say that like, oh, in reality XYZ, but the thing is that reality doesn't exist. Your reality is different than my reality.
Right.
There's an is, and then there's how we all perceive it.
Hmm.
And how we perceive it is going to be based off of our past experiences, our traumas, our emotions, like all these things. And so the more that we can control those filters, the way that we see the world, then we change our reality in our mind. And so
Wow.
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, I'm listening. I
I was
love
gonna
it.
say, so the more that we can get a handle on those beliefs that we have, the trauma that we've had in the past, the negative emotions, then we start to see the world differently. Like that's the key. That's the key across the board. That's police officers, that's the community, that's everybody. Like that's the solution.
I like
But
it.
there's
Look
such
at
an
that.
opposition for people to have that emotional intelligence. I mean, again, like that's my tinfoil hat. You got to ask the question why? Like, why is there such an opposition to people's emotional intelligence?
I love that, and I think I'm gonna enjoy this part even more. You mentioned filters, okay? I
Yeah.
know in past, presentations that you've given and talks that you've given, you mentioned that we have preset filters.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what those are?
Yeah.
What are
So
preset filters?
yeah. So every single second we're being hit with 2 million, well, I even say 2 to 11 million bits of information at every second, right? So this is going to be like the
Mhm,
sound of my voice. This is
mhm,
going to be the light that's bouncing off the objects in the room. So our
mhm,
brains, through our hands, through our eyes, through our nose, through our taste buds, through our ears, we're getting all this information.
mhm.
And the mind can only process 126 bits of information at any given second.
Okay, wait,
So,
wait.
yeah,
We get how many?
typically we'll say 2 million bits of information, but
Okay.
with the advent of technology, it could be up to like 11 million bits of information. It's going to be like things
Wow.
on your notifications on your phone. It's going to be all the different electronic devices. It's like there's a ton of data that we're being bombarded with like every single second.
And our brains can only process how much of that you said? You said 128?
126 bits,
Wow.
right?
Okay, I'm sorry. Go for it.
Right.
I was like,
So
wow.
so we're taking all that information and we're
Yeah,
funneling it down to 126 bits.
yeah.
And then from there, the mind it has to make a representation of what's happening.
Hmm,
We can get into whether someone sees pictures, if they hear sounds, if they perceive the world and tastes, touch, feeling the way that they feel, but we get what's called an internal representation of the world.
okay.
And then based off of that, that will then create a thought or an emotion. And
Mm,
then the emotion, whether we feel happy, whether we feel sad, excited, whatever the case may be, we then take action based off of how we feel because there's a physiological shift in our body,
mhm,
and then we take action. If we're fearful, then we're going to like go into fight or flight.
okay.
So think about someone who has experienced trauma in the past,
Mhm,
and me as a black man, I'm walking past him on the street, and
mhm,
somewhere in the past there was some experience with another black man that was traumatic.
mhm,
They would generalize the situation and say that all black men are X.
mhm.
So then, even though I'm a happy, smiling, jovial person, like that information gets deleted out.
Hmm,
You're a black man. You're a threat. I'm going to kick into this state. and I'm going to filter everything that I know about this situation that I see in my two eyeballs and in my ears. I'm going to generalize based off of the fact that you're a black man, and this is how I deal with black people. That's that I'm sure that there's officers out there that do it. There's there's old ladies out there that do it.
Right.
I do it.
Right. Right.
You do it.
Yeah.
Everyone does it.
Is it a natural human response? Is that fair to
Yeah,
say that that's just a natural human
yeah,
response as we're
definitely.
processing all this information?
If you were a caveman and a saber-toothed tiger was like lurking like towards you, you're not gonna sit there and go, "Is this a nice tiger? Like, is this one of the friendly ones?" It's like, nope, that's a tiger. I don't need to be in close proximity to the tiger, so I need to respond accordingly. It's like
Yeah.
just a primitive like response.
Okay. Okay. And so you mentioned, so there's 3 of these filters, right? You
Yeah.
said
Mhm.
deletion.
Yep.
Um,
Deletion, generalization, and distortion.
can you explain to what's distortion? What happens when there's a distortion? I guess the filter that
Yeah.
comes into
So
place.
I was given an example the other day. So I'm training for a half marathon,
Okay.
and as I was out running, this guy he comes whipping past me, and I was like, instantly I'm like, man, like, I'm out here running 12 or 11 miles, and I think I'm doing really well, and this guy, this young skinny guy, just comes running past me, and the first thing I said to myself was, "Oh, he's not going as far as I'm going." Right. So I took the data of him whipping past me and me perceiving that I'm running slow, and I distorted it and said, "Oh, the reason why he passed me was because he's not running as far as I'm running."
Hmm.
So it's when we take information and we change it so that we can make it mean something different.
Hmm. Okay. And again, my mind is going to, policing in the community. Is there a way? I mean, you say it's a natural human response.
Yeah. Mhm.
How do we manage that? Can we fix it? Is it possible? Like, what do we do? Because some of these things are not good, like you said. I mean, we all do it. We all
Yeah.
do it, and it may not be intentional, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned
Mhm.
this sentence that's an unconscious.
Yeah.
I can never pronounce the word properly.
Unconscious.
Unconscious.
Yes.
um,
Unconscious.
yeah, unkind science, right? Unconscious. How do we manage that, right? Because
Yeah.
obviously, let's say, even if you're a member of the community, you're judging, let's say, let's just keep it 100. Black person, you're judging a white officer. He's
Right.
racist.
Right.
Every white officer is racist, right? Which is
Right.
not the view of every black person. Let me make that clear. I know that's not true, but it's
Right.
not an uncommon one, right? Or it's something that you may hear.
Yep.
So how do we is it possible to manage it?
Again, like I said, it all comes back to the individual's responsibility to manage
Mm,
themselves, their
okay.
emotions, their traumas, their
Mhm,
everything.
mhm.
Because in that box, right, in that little filter, as the information is coming in, I don't know if can I share?
Yeah, yeah, let's do
Would
it.
that make it
Let's do it.
easier
Yeah,
to
sure, let's give people are I'm a visual learner, why not? So, you have to walk me through this though, Roshan. Oh, there you go, perfect. You got it.
are you up?
I can see it. I'm
Okay.
up.
Yeah, so, so like I was saying, so 2,000,000 bits of information is coming in, right? And we're receiving this information through, like I said, our eyes, through our nose, through our taste buds, through our fingertips.
Mhm.
And you see here where it says delete, distort, generalize.
Yes.
So in here, you see there's memories, there's decisions,
Mhm.
there's values, there's belief, there's attitudes. So this is what we get to work on when we
Mm,
go to counseling, when we hire coaches. This is what we're working on
right.
is cleaning up this area here so that as the 2,000,000 bits of information comes in, when you see over here where it says filters and then it has another drop arrow where it says internal representation,
Yes. Yes, I
So
do.
that's going to tell. So when you come into contact with someone in the community, the information that you're receiving is coming through here. It's being deleted, distorted, generalized, and then you make a picture inside your head. This is
Mhm.
the result here is friend or foe, in an
Right,
earlier example.
right.
And so you can see how someone who has had a traumatic upbringing, or have run-ins with people of opposite color,
Mhm.
where their filter is going to automatically default to threat, 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 threat,
Hmm.
threat, threat,
Mhm.
right? Like no matter what, like it could be like the old man with a cane, or like you said, the boiling water,
Yeah,
right? If there were two, three people there, they all receive the same 2 million bits of information.
yeah.
But for one person, that was a threat, which
Mhm.
is why you have like officers that are involved in an altercation with someone, and there's some officers that are like in disbelief of what happened.
Yeah.
They're like,
Mhm.
how did it get here? Like that escalated really quick,
Right. Yeah, that can happen
right?
for sure. Yeah,
Because everyone is like has the same 2 million bits of information that's available to them,
yeah.
but the difference is inside that person's brain, their filters.
Mhm.
Maybe they had an argument that morning, whatever the case may be. But, as I always say, like whatever happened that day, like that's just a symptom of something that happened years ago.
Yeah. Wow.
Like if they're dealing with anxiety, if they're dealing with fear, if they're dealing with anything that is resulting in a result that they don't want, it wasn't just that day. Like
Yeah.
they were likely carrying that before they even became an
Mhm.
officer.
Yep. And I talk about this often too. Like I said, when I teach this class, it is safe to say it's a trigger. They're triggered by whatever that event or whatever has just occurred. It has triggered that emotion, that trauma
Yep.
that has not been treated. That's
Yep.
essentially what happens.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I love that. So I want to. This has been so enlightening, and I know that people that are watching and listening have been intrigued as much as I have. I want to learn about the hypnotherapy.
Okay.
And maybe we can
What
have
would
a
you
whole
like
nother.
what would
I
you like
know.
to know about hypnotherapy,
I feel
Jill?
like you're I don't know. Don't
Your
try
eyes
any funny
are
business
beginning to
right now.
close.
Okay, and maybe we can like I said, I don't know. I don't know if it's something that we do a whole nother session on or not,
Yeah.
but we were talking previously and you made a statement. You said that we are hypnotized every single day.
Yep.
Please tell me what that means.
Yeah. So let me share again. Can you see my slides?
I can, yes.
Okay. So our brains are comprised of the conscious portion of our brain. That's 10% of the daily things that we do, and it's responsible for analyzing the information as it come in. And so
Mhm.
its primarily duty is to, does this make sense? That's like the question is it's asking itself all day. It
Okay.
needs to find connections between and find logic, like in a situation.
Okay.
And then the unconscious portion of our brain, that's responsible for our heart beating, all the automatic functions, those thoughts that get kicked off. That's what we call our subconscious. In between it, there's a guard called the critical faculty.
Okay.
And what happens is as things come in, like suggestions, it goes into the conscious, and then in order for it to get into the unconscious, to be programmed into our brains, into our long-term memory, the
Mhm.
critical faculty has to allow it to come in.
Okay.
And so hypnosis, what hypnosis does is it tells the critical faculty, it's okay. You can let this suggestion come in now.
Hmm.
And so what a therapist is doing is working with this to allow the suggestions to come into your mind now. And
Hmm.
so we can do it through intonation. We can do it in what's called embedded commands. Um, and so hypnosis is just about getting suggestions into your unconscious mind.
Wow.
That's all it is.
Interesting.
That's all hypnosis is.
Huh. Okay. So don't judge me here. Okay.
got you.
And I'm saying this just because I'm sure people who are watching, they're like, okay, I understand what you're saying, but give me the real. Like you and I'm taking what was that movie where they're stirring the cup? What was that movie? Get Out,
Oh, okay. Yep.
right?
Yep.
So is it literally like that to where you're doing certain things? I don't know. This is maybe me. Okay, like I said, don't judge me. You do certain things, and it seems like, right, or what I've seen in the past, right, what you see on TV, right? I probably shouldn't say that. TV is whatever, but it seems like you take control of the person's brain and you
No.
no. Okay, so tell me.
You Yeah, so while you're under hypnosis, you won't do anything that you wouldn't ordinarily do if you weren't under hypnosis. Like,
Okay.
you are in full control at all times.
Okay. Okay. So that clears up a lot of, I
Yeah,
think, speculation,
yeah,
not only for myself, but for other people. Okay. All right. So it's not
but
like you go,
yeah,
but what?
yeah. So, but here's I'm gonna give you a twist though, right?
Okay.
So earlier we were talking about beliefs, like where these beliefs come from,
Mhm.
like that people have about, for instance, about police officers.
Okay.
If it wasn't their belief, whose belief is it and where did it come from? So
Hmm.
when I say that you're programmed all the time, like every day, how do they get these thoughts into your mind?
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
And so we have to ask the questions of how is television, how is music, how is
Mm. Mhm.
a lot of the things that how is social media, how does that influence the programming of the beliefs that people have that they go, oh well, no, that's what I believe.
Mm. Hmm.
Well, when did you make that decision?
Right.
"Oh, I don't know. I mean, I've always felt that way."
Right.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Wow. So you just said something that made me think about some things. Okay. It just made me think
Exactly.
about some things,
And
right?
and if you don't see me, like, because please keep this recording. Like I
Right. Right. So come find me if you don't hear from me in 2 weeks.
exactly. Put a little bell
Um,
on me or something.
no, I mean, that just brought up a lot of, and my mind actually goes to, um, so one of my brothers, he says that I've been brainwashed, right? When it comes to policing and, thinking a certain way and whatnot. And I don't think I've been brainwashed. I know that I'm smart enough to know what's right and what's wrong. And if someone's trying to get me to believe in something that is just completely false, right? Um, but you do pose a question. Why do I think the way that I think about certain things? Right? And
You
essentially, I've been trained. Okay, that's the proper term that we're gonna
trained.
use. I
Let's
have been
let's use the word trained.
trained.
Yes, trained.
I've
You
been
you
trained.
talk to your brother and say, "You know what? I realize that I've been trained, not brainwashed."
Oh man, we're gonna have to talk about this another time because this is definitely bringing up some flags. They're not red,
Hey,
they're yellow.
just
Some yellow
you said
flags
it.
are popping up.
You said it.
Okay, thank you so much, Roshan. I've learned so much, and I know the people who are watching, listen, have learned a lot. And whenever I do these interviews, these conversations, I definitely like to open the floor to whomever I'm speaking to because I know that people have questions to ask officers, and it's not always common that people feel comfortable asking certain questions. And so, if you have ever had any questions that you ever want to ask an officer, my opinion about something, feel free to ask it, and I will answer it as honest as possible. But yeah, I love to give people a peek behind the veil on what we actually think about certain things.
Yeah. So the question I have is, as a police officer, when you come into contact with someone in the community and you want their ID,
Okay.
how does having their ID help you as a police officer investigate whether they've committed a crime or not?
Well, I think there's a lot of factors. There's a lot of different things that would contribute to that. So ultimately, here in America, when you have an identification card, essentially what that is it's who you are, right? It identifies who you are, hence ID. It would depend on what I am investigating. So let's say, and I'll just set up an example, and you can tell me if it doesn't fit, what your question is. Let's say we're looking for someone, right? Who meets a certain that's a certain person, right? Your ID essentially is going to tell me if you're that person or not.
Right.
Ultimately, in addition to that, your ID is connected to a certain database, right? It's connected to a warrant database, what we call a warrant database. And so let's say I take your ID, I run your name, which basically means we use the term, or the word run means we basically input it into the system, this database,
Mhm.
and it returns with information, say, hey, this person has a warrant for their arrest for X, Y, and Z. Right. So essentially that is how I would utilize someone's ID when I come in contact with them. Like I said, that it varies obviously based on what I'm investigating, if that answers your
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. So if the officer isn't able to articulate a crime, and so they really don't have justification for making contact, yet they're still demanding ID, and they use the I need to see your ID so that I
Hmm.
can investigate.
Hmm.
What is having their idea? How is having their idea going to help
Okay.
them investigate?
Okay. So, and see, I missed that part of your question. So, you can't just request and demand someone's ID. That's illegal. You have to have what's called reasonable suspicion. Okay, and reasonable suspicion is a set of information that uh, allows you to believe that, or that has any officer to believe that a crime has occurred, is occurring, or is about to occur. Okay, that's reasonable suspicion. Now, your reasonable suspicion also has to be coupled with certain facts, right? So, for example, um, a radio call comes out, right? Meaning we get a 911, someone calls 911, let's say at a 7-Eleven. Okay. They say, hey, someone just robbed our 7-Eleven. It was a male Hispanic wearing a black hoodie headed this direction. Okay. Now we have reasonable suspicion based on that call, based on the information that we're getting. And if we're in that area, we're looking for someone who fits that description: male Hispanic, hoodie, run this direction.
Mhm.
Okay. Now I'm allowed to stop you and investigate. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
so we can't just legally, you can't just stop someone and demand their ID. Now,
Mhm.
we can do what's called a consensual encounter. Okay.
Mhm. Right.
In a consensual encounter, you don't have to stay. You don't have to produce anything. Now, can I ask you for your ID? Yes, but the key is I have to ask you. I can't demand it. The moment I demand it, now it's being upgraded into, and I'm detaining you. And if I'm detaining you, I better have some reasonable suspicion to to express why I'm detaining you.
Right.
Otherwise, I am now violating your rights.
Yeah.
So if that gives you kind of more
Yeah. Definitely.
understanding.
So in the example where you're looking for a male Hispanic
Mhm.
and you come across me, right? Let's say you
Okay.
think I'm Cuban, right?
Right?
It, it's it's
It's
been
possible.
said.
No, you're right. You're right. You're
It's
right.
been said.
You're right.
So again, so you get my ID, you run my ID.
Mhm.
How does that help you determine whether I'm the guy who just robbed the 7-Eleven?
Well, that's not the ID is in is by itself is not going to help me determine, right? The
Right.
ID is going to help me identify who you are, right? That's the purpose of the ID, is to identify who you are. Now that is combined with now statements from witnesses, from victims, from cameras, right? And I put all those things together to form that this person on this ID, did or did not commit the crime that the victim is claiming you committed, the witnesses are claiming you committed, and the possible evidence claim that you committed. So the ID is basically just a form of identifying you, right?
Mhm.
And hopefully it's a, I mean, if it's hopefully it's a real ID, right? We do live in a
Yeah.
day where people get fake
Yeah.
IDs.
But you're gonna come to that determination regardless of if I provide ID or not.
What do you
right?
mean, come to that
Because
determination? If you
meaning
committed the crime?
so yeah, as you investigate, because you have
Mhm.
so the person who robbed the 7-Eleven, the store clerk doesn't know their specific ID,
Right.
and so you're out looking for someone that fits the description,
Yeah.
and you run across someone who fits the description.
Mhm.
You then have to investigate to say that that specific person is the person that robbed the 7-Eleven, and that's regardless of their ID that they're carrying.
Mhm.
And so you're using the ID later to attach that person to the crime. Should you be able to show that it was this person? I'm sure you probably like take the person and do like a drive by, like,
Yeah,
hey, was this the
call it a field
person?
show up. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Is this the
right.
person? Yeah, that's him.
Look at me. I could be a police officer.
You got it down. That's all you need to learn to do. I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
I watch TV. Look at me.
But yeah, I mean, essentially, that's what an ID does, right? It provides what an identification, this person's name, address, etc.
Yeah,
Um, to connect it to whatever that crime was. So,
right.
did that
And that's
answer your question?
yeah, and so
Okay,
if I'm not the assailant, then
you're free to
so
go, man.
is there anything that I should be concerned about having my ID ran? Like, do I show up in a report? Do I? Because I think a lot of people are
That's a
more
great question.
concerned about showing up in a report than anything.
That's a great question. I love that. Yes and no, right? Everything that we do as police officers, especially when it comes now in there's a digital world, right? Everything is tracked. And a lot of it is tracked to ensure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. I live in here in LA. You can't just run, I was gonna say Kobe because I have a picture of Kobe here, but you can't just run celebrities' information just to get their address.
Right.
It's
Right.
illegal. So
Yeah.
one of the reasons for that is for checks and balances and to just document because this now may also be a shocker. People lie. People lie on you, right? And I think it varies for every agency, but it'll come up in the system like, okay, on this stop, whenever there is a radio call that's generated, someone calls 911, it's assigned what we call an incident number. And
Mhm.
in that incident number, there's basically a description of what happened. When you get rid of the call, you give a disposition to the call. You say, "Hey, I stopped this person. I ran their name. Blah 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 blah. The information came back to this person. Yada yada yada. Turns out that weren't the person. They're questioned and released."
Right.
So it's kept in a database in the sense that it's documented on that call,
Yeah.
but it's not kept in the sense that there's now a mark or flag on your record of some sort, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
As an officer, do you is there a potential for an officer to use that information to distort or generalize when they come into contact with someone? For instance, let's say that I made contact with an officer, several times, and
Mhm.
there was no issues. And then you come along, you go, man, like this guy makes contact with officers a lot. Like, what's going on? Like,
Hmm.
do you see that information, and is there a potential for you to have a distorted perception of me based off of that?
I see what you're saying. Okay. Um, Not necessarily. We keep a database of people we come in contact with, but like I said, there's no flag, right? If anything, if your information or these constant contacts that you're having with police, if anything, is just being discussed. Right? Word of mouth. You're like, "Hey, so there's this guy that lives on such and such a street. He's always
Yeah,
doing X, Y, and Z. Be mindful of that." You know what I
yeah,
mean? It's really just a conversation that
yeah,
that we'll have with each other as opposed to a digital footprint. And we
yeah,
do have those in place for the right situations. For example, people who suffer from mental illness, who are chronic callers, who just
yeah,
call in kind of, you know, haphazardly.
yeah,
But no, at least not that I know of. That's the best that I
yeah.
can tell you. Yeah,
No,
those are great questions. I love
yeah,
those. This was a great conversation. I think we're gonna have to have a part 2. I wanna hear more about this hypnosis thing. Roshan, I love what you do, and I'm pretty sure people who are listening and watching would love to find a way to get in contact with you. Feel free to share your information. We'll put your information in the descriptions of this video, and you can contact him there. But let us know, what do you have going on?
I have a website, roshunjones.com, roshunjones.com. You can
Mhm,
also follow me on Instagram, Roshun, roshun dot jones.
mhm.
And so right now I'm running a Align 60. And so what that is a lot of what we talked about today. There's a lot of people that are struggling with those filters that we talk about that's
Right.
distorting the way that they see the world.
Mhm,
And so I'm working with people for 90 days to help them release any lingering anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, and shame,
mhm.
and also helping them find out what their core values are and helping them get aligned with their purpose. And so primarily I work with Christian entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
but I'm opening it up to any officers out there that are struggling with this, to
Sure.
help you get more alignment with your purpose. If you're faith based, even better. Maybe you're out there and you're saying, "Man, like I need to have a closer connection with God," and
Yeah.
I've just kind of strayed apart. I'd love to work with you. I'd love to talk with you and
Mhm.
figure out what's keeping you from having a closer relationship with Him. So yeah, so reach out. Let's just have a discussion. If you have any questions and you're saying, "Hey, like I'm having this reoccurring thought," or anything that's mindset related, just reach out.
Mhm.
I'm always open to help people get some clarity on what they're experiencing in life.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, take advantage of this. I myself, I know the benefits of having a coach. You know, people are like,
Absolutely,
a coach, what are you talking about? Let me tell you, every successful person has multiple coaches.
multiple,
Multiple coaches, right?
multiple.
And so it's not just this thing, right? It actually works, and I can tell you from personal experience. Roshan, thank you for coming on. Well, thank you again for tuning in to another episode of The Human Side with Officer Jill. And as always, I will extend an offer to you. If you want to have a conversation with me regarding anything policing, feel free to reach out to me. My information is in the description of this broadcast, and I am willing, ready, and able to have a respectful conversation with anyone. Remember to go ahead and hit that like button, share it with someone who you think may benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe, but most importantly, remember, if you show me your human side, I'll show you mine. All right, y'all. Peace.